From the Federation of Muslim Organisations, who's been advising the Foreign Office on how to deal with current cases of British people who may have gone to Syria. Suleiman, John's report raised some very important questions, obviously, but how far do we go in tracking what people are doing online? Are we in danger of infringing their liberties?
Firstly, I think we must put on record that anything that is out there that may safeguard our country and our national security should be something that we should consider. My difficulty with this particular software that we have is it has not been tried nor has it been tested, and there's issues around being a commercial organization selling software to various other schools.
I mean, it's being tested now, isn't it, in Leicestershire schools?
It's actually a pilot scheme that's coming out, so we do not have the results of this. Also, we need to understand that the issue about individuals being radicalized on the internet is not as simple as some would like it to be. As an example, if there are young people who are accessing these bomb-making websites or radical websites, can equally do it at home, they can do it on the smartphone, in their pocket, etc. They do not necessarily have to use the computers at home. And in some of the work that I've done, certainly in the south of the country, where I have mentored a young person, 14 years old, he, within a secure training center, accessed bomb-making websites 800 times. So the question is, within a secure training center, how does one access this? And it's part of a greater complication of how people do this. We often think that people will simply Google it or Bling it or Yahoo, but no, they go to third and fourth party websites, which are very difficult for one and what they call a dark web.
How widespread is this problem? I mean, are people being radicalised right here in the East Midlands?
Well, I think people are radicalised all over the country, and I don't think East Midlands is any safer than any other part of the country. The report by the Home Office Select Committee pointed out that the internet is the single biggest radicalizer, and this is something that one can read on, and of course it was completed at De Montfort University in Leicester through Keith Vaz.
Let me bring in Nigel Mills here. Nigel, is the government doing enough on this?
And I think we've tried to do as much as we can. I guess there's more that can be done, as the Chancellor said at Prime Minister's questions. If there's more things that can be done that need doing, then we ought to fund those and do them. But we have trained 160,000 public sector workers to spot the signs of radicalisation and to start taking the action against it. So I think
it's not stopping some people from doing that, is it?
No, I mean, I think it is going to be one of the generational problems that we have, is how do we convince young people of all faiths and none that this is a great country to live, and the kind of rights and freedoms we have here are things they ought to value, and what's happening in these Middle Eastern countries is wrong and not something that they ought to be thinking of supporting.
Margaret Beckett, why should we stop people from going if they're adults? It's their choice, isn't it?
I think, yes, of course, people have a choice, but I think if you were in a family where there was an anxiety that a young person might, you would want the opportunity to be able to at least get them to talk to you and see whether you could actually talk them round or in some way, affect their decision, and not just kind of stand back and say, oh, well, it's their right, they can do what they like. So I think, one must feel sympathy for families who have those concerns about their young people.
Suleiman, what do you make of the Prime Minister's comments that people may be quietly condoning extremist views? Is his comment helpful, or is it insulting to some communities?
I would think if he had chosen his words slightly more carefully, it may have come across to the community a lot differently. What the highlighting factor here is, we are talking about Muslims in the Muslim community, where we know that radicalization takes place in other sections of society, far right, etc., which is equally a threat. So if it was rounded off a bit more, may have won over the hearts and minds of people, but simply targeting on a section of the community, we must remember that we live in a country where the policing is done through the consent of the community, so community support is absolutely vital in the fight against terrorism.
Well, what should the government be doing? What should Nigel Mills' party be doing, and the government?
I would say they need to engage more with the community and not isolate themselves from one section of the community to the other. What often happens is people take polarized views one way or the other, and there's no middle ground that we can work on, and I think it's a middle ground that needs to be explored.
It's a very difficult area, obviously, finding the right balance, isn't it? And the language now coming from government on this issue is beginning to sound more forceful, but some people might say it's too little too late.
Well, I mean, I guess that's not a great idea, is it? I mean, I think if we need to do more, we should do more. I think the Prime Minister's language of some people are quietly condoning is pretty moderate language. And it's also worth noting that this software we were talking about in these Leicester schools also looks for associates for far-right things as well. It's not just looking at Muslim terrorism. So, I mean, I think I would agree with Suleiman. We need more community dialogue. We do not want to scapegoat one community or another, but I think there probably is a need for the Muslim community to be quite alert to this and make sure that, that there aren't rogue preachers or hate preachers turning up who are saying things that really aren't acceptable.
Do you agree with that, Suleiman?
Well, the Muslim community have always spoken up against it. I have for the last 10, 12 years. It's funny how the argument or the debate has moved on. When we see situations, example of far-right or neo-Nazis, who do we ask then to be answerable for their activities? Somehow we've moved into a direction in this country whereby if a criminal activity is handled by a handful of people, yes, we are putting the whole community in the dock to be answerable for that.
They're to blame.
Exactly. Whereas it's never happened before in our history. If you go back to the 50s and 60s when we had the problem in relation to the Jewish community, much later we had problems in relation to the Irish community, and then the debate in the 70s and 80s between black and white, and now apparently the boogeyman is the Muslim community. And who knows, maybe in the next 5, 10 years it'll be somebody else. Okay. So it's not that we are not taking our responsibility seriously. I, for a start, would condemn it immediately.
What you're saying is everybody needs to take responsibility for this. And Margaret Beckett, we know that out of 700 people who've gone to Syria, at least one has come from Derby. Are people in Derby concerned about this? And what are you doing in your constituency, which after all has a very diverse population?
I think people are concerned about it. But it comes back to all of us, I think, in all our communities, recognise that it's not always easy to know what the young are thinking or to be on the same wavelength or to communicate effectively with them. One of the things I think would be interesting, because I understand it, this software company already produces stuff which is related to racism and so on, as well as right-wing extremism. What I would like to know is how effective is that? Because is this a tool, whether used in quite this way and whether just in schools or whatever, is this a tool that works? And has it made a difference to the things that they're already working on?
Well,
that would
this
be
software that
interesting
you just mentioned, yes, we saw in our film as well, could be rolled out to all schools in the new academic year after this piloting. But Suleiman Nagdi, thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio to discuss that with us. Well, now £1,000 just to turn up for a job interview sounds like a great deal, but the Leicestershire firm making the offer says it still hasn't found any takers. The digital marketing company is desperate to recruit, but so far hasn't found anyone suitably qualified to interview. And it comes as unemployment falls again here in the East Midlands and wages are rising. But behind the figures, are we facing a skills shortage? Rob Pitton reports.
Hey Sam, which client?